Hello and welcome to today's episode of Stand Up. I'm recording this opening at a hotel room in Pittsburgh with an H. I forgot the H on Facebook when I promoted my show, so sorry about that for anybody who was offended. Great show last night in Pittsburgh with Jay Alcovan. We had an awesome time, and there was several listeners. I think there was about 10 folks that listen and support the show and me for a long time, so really cool to meet you guys that came out. Thank you so much for coming out. And now it is off to see Ava at Ithaca College. But first, a conversation with Jonathan Alter, who was for a very long time one of the most respected columnists in the country. He had a column at Newsweek for years, longtime MSNBC and NBC News commentator and columnist, best-selling author, Emmy-winning documentary filmmaker, television producer, a Harvard guy, not afraid to criticize Harvard, including in this interview. His most recent book is His Very Best Life, Jimmy Carter, A Life, received all kinds of reviews and a New York Times bestseller. His earlier books, also New York Times bestseller. The Center Holds, Obama and His Enemies, The Promise, President Obama, the Year One, and The Defining Moment, FDR's 100 Days and the Triumph of Hope. He's a big deal, and I'm very happy to have him joining me on today's show. You should go subscribe to his Substack newsletter. It's called Old Goats, Ruminating with Friends, and I love it, and I love him. I've known John for a long time, and I was really happy to have him sit down with me. We talked about 48 hours ago about what's happening in the Middle East and in the House of Representatives, so a tiny bit of it's dated because they did nominate Steve Scalise, but I think what he has to say is pretty relevant. So let's do it right now with Jonathan Alter. Again, I'm on the road, so harder to make this work, but I wanted to make sure I got this conversation up for you as soon as I could. I think it's really interesting. We talk all about the Middle East conflict, his passionate opinions on it, and more. So let's do it right now with Jonathan Alter.
And there he is. The old goat himself, the old goat of old goats, one of the smartest guys I know. Very excited that you took some time out of watching your grandchildren to hang out with me. Hi.
Actually, hi, Pete. We only have one right now, Rosie, who's almost 2, only one grandchild, but obviously hoping for more. And I realized moments ago that I had not done you the favor of shaving before this appearance. So for those of you who are watching this, my apologies. I'm too old to be one of the stubble guys who just walks around, without deciding whether to shave or not shave. So my apologies.
You really are right on the edge of that. I agree with you. I think you're right about that. You know what? Why don't you, and as a result, I'll press pause, go shave, and then we'll come back and talk about these very important issues.
We're not going to do
So you've got a really thorough piece that you've written covering a lot of historical context. And I just want to say, as long as I've been trying to understand the Arab-Israeli conflict, I always feel like I'm missing something. And people have different timelines and histories that they depend on. How do you generally approach when there are nothing's like this, but how do you generally approach this issue as a journalist and as a writer, having as much experience as you have in the region, reporting from there, reporting on everything that's gone on there over the years?
Well, first of all, it is very complicated, but just because it's complicated doesn't mean that you can't glimpse the fundamental moral issues when they present themselves and find moral clarity. And so, I think the best way to understand what happened on Saturday was actually summarized by Congressman Daniel Goldman of New York, a freshman congressman. And he said, just imagine that you're at Coachella and you're there to have a good time, to dance and hang out. And suddenly, not one or two, but a bunch of terrorists start shooting people and using even RPGs and killing large numbers of your friends in front of you, and then grabbing everybody they can cart off. In other cases, at a kibbutz, they were grabbing old women and babies and carting them back to Gaza to hold them as hostages, then promising yesterday that they will execute the hostages. then at the same time, you have people who don't want to call them terrorists. They're so confused by everything that their head has been filled with about the situation in the Middle East that they can't see the truth when it's staring them in the face. And I think it's very unfortunate. It's a product of a society that has not educated people well, and a lot of people mouthing off about things they know very little about. At the same time, Israel has acted shamefully in recent years. It's very harsh occupation of the West Bank, illegal settlements on the West Bank. But just because they've done that, it hardly makes them responsible for the obscene violence that has been committed against their civilians. And this is what this just despicable statement from Harvard student groups, it says that Israel bears entire responsibility for this terrorism. That's insane. It's people have lost all sight of reality. It's like saying that, that George Floyd bore entire responsibility for being murdered, or the people in the Pulse nightclub bore entire responsibility.
Well, I want to ask you
for being murdered.
About,
please.
You spent a good bit at the beginning of this piece talking about that issue, and I think it's fair to say that's generally criticism of folks on the American left that might not use the word terrorist. I do, as I was reading that, I was thinking about one of the arguments you're hearing right away from anyone from Don Jr. to so many other crazy people on the right, is they immediately started focusing on America's border and said those same people are going to be coming across and doing the same things to Americans. And my reaction to that was, listen, I'm really not nearly as concerned about foreign terrorists as I am domestic terrorists. So would you say by the same, just wondering, someone that goes in and shoots a bunch of black people in their church, Jewish people in their synagogue, black folks at a grocery store, are these white supremacists, are they terrorists? Because isn't the main terrorist threat in America, and hasn't it really been since 9/11, right-wing, white supremacists, white nationalists, Christian nationalist types? Aren't they all terrorists?
They're killers. Many of them are mentally ill, and mentally ill killers, mass murderers, are not always terrorists, because terrorists are using violence to pursue political ends. And so there are some of these, the people, the guy who shot up the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh, I think that you could define him as a terrorist.
The guy who shot up the black church, I don't say their names, he wanted to start a civil war. Others want to start a civil war.
All right, if he wanted to start a civil war, then I would define him as a terrorist as well. But there are other people who they just become unhinged. And so usually it should be about those who are trying to terrorize a wider community in order to achieve certain political ends. In this case, it's the destruction of the state of Israel. But just to the Don Jr. point, I mean, this is just one of many pathetic right-wing arguments we've heard in the last few days. I mean, even Tim Scott was saying, well, this is all Joe Biden's fault. Really? Yep. Really? I know you have to pander to Republican voters by blaming everything on Biden, but that's preposterous. And then you had J.D. Vance and a bunch of his people in his amen corner saying, oh, the money for this came from Iran that they got from the unfrozen assets after the prisoner swap. Really? How about maybe check your facts before you tell a frickin' lie? Actually, that money is in a South Korean bank as we speak and has not been unfrozen, so it can't go to Iran. Now, as far as Iran being behind this, there's a Wall Street Journal article that suggests that they were involved, and I think we will, it's quite likely that we will find Iranian involvement, but that doesn't mean that, just because the United States wanted to get some prisoners back, that somehow it's to blame. It's kind of like if Democrats the day after 9/11 said, oh, this is all George Bush's fault. Democrats they've got their problems, but they're just not as irresponsible in trying to seize political advantage from a terrible crisis as Republicans are.
Let's just stick on some of these other criticisms. Mike Pompeo, the former Secretary of State, who I still think will be the Republican nominee. I have to keep saying that because that was my prediction. Jonathan?
Okay. That's your story and you're sticking to it, Pete. Good luck with that.
Yeah, sticking to it. Either him or Will Hurd. I know he dropped out yesterday, but I still think. Hey, McCarthy can come back. So Mike Pompeo says the Biden administration's first instinct was appeasement, and that weakness is how this war started in the first place. What do you think about that type of it's appeasement?
Yeah, that's preposterous. I mean, the appeasers in American political life right now are the people who are kissing Vladimir Putin's ass, trying to get us to cut off funding, which would not only doom Ukraine, but as General Milley said on 60 Minutes this week, it would force us to double or triple our defense budget over the next few years to protect against Russian aggression in Europe. So, we have appeasers right now in our culture. They're in the Republican Party, and they do not include Joe Biden. Full stop.
So the issue of Ukraine, Russia's lack of support, what's gone on in the House, and now this war in Israel, the invasion by Hamas in Israel. How are those two issues connected? Because I think that the perception that the American that we're going to have here is we can't do all of this, or we're already hearing, I think it was that prick Josh Hawley said we've got to immediately shift all the resources and money from Ukraine to Israel. To your point, we obviously already give Israel billions every year, but how does that domestic politics and whether or not there's any policy, these two regions being at war, are they connected to each other? Can we handle both of them?
Absolutely, we can handle both the same way we handled a war in the Pacific and a war in Europe during World War II. When you have major strategic interests, you do everything. We're a strong, powerful country, and we can do both. What I'm hoping is that this gives Joe Biden an opportunity to go to the country and say, we need to do both. Putin and Hamas have something in common. They both attack innocent people. They kidnap children and bring them back across the border, which is what Putin has been doing in Ukraine and what Hamas is doing in Israel. And so if you believe in freedom, if you're against killing and kidnapping children, support our broad aid package to military aid for both Ukraine and Israel. And I think he can get some Republican support for that. If you listen to people like Congressman Mike Rogers, who's the chair of the House Armed Services Committee, and other, reasonable, conservative, reasonable Republicans in the House and in the Senate, people like Lindsey Graham, they understand the stakes involved in Ukraine. They're not off on this ridiculous Josh Hawley, Rand Paul, J.D. Vance appeasement tangent. And I hope they're going to prevail. And I think that the election of the next speaker is a test of this, because if Kevin McCarthy, who's apparently going to try a comeback, if he wants to get over the top the next time, he's going to need 5 or 6, maybe a few more Democratic votes. And I think Hakeem Jeffries will give him those in exchange for support for both Israel and Ukraine. He's certainly not going to give it to them for nothing, which is what McCarthy foolishly requested a week ago when he talked to Jeffries on the phone. And, when it came out later that he didn't offer Jeffries anything in exchange for Democratic votes for speaker, and then afterward, these Republicans are bitching that the Democrats didn't rescue them from their own folly. Of course they didn't rescue them because they didn't offer them anything. Zero. That's what McCarthy offered the Democrats. So this time, he'd need to offer them something. I think it would be a combination of some rule changes that would be in his interest, like getting rid of the ridiculous motion to vacate, which is what caused his problem in the first place, where one person, Matt Gaetz, can get rid of the speaker. So a combination of getting rid of that asinine rule and support for Ukraine and Israel, he can get the help from the Democrats that he needs to come back as Speaker, which I think is now a live possibility because Jim Jordan doesn't seem like he has the votes. Scalise doesn't seem like he has the votes either. And as a survivor of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and blood cancer, when he says, his staff says he has a rare blood cancer, but they won't say what it is, that's very suspicious. I mean, I had a rare blood cancer 19 years ago and was given a 50-50 chance of living 2 years. So, you got to know what you're dealing with. I happen to come up lucky, but, Scalise is not being transparent about his health.
Is it fair to say, or say more about Hamas's attack in Israel affecting the Speaker of the House consequences, the conclusion here? I mean, it's a direct, you're saying there's an effect there. I mean, I think it's...
Well, I think that quite possibly, not for sure, but there's quite possibly an effect. In the meantime, these bozos have been preventing, talking particularly about Tuberville, but it includes some House members as well. They've been preventing the Pentagon from filling important positions that are important in these, two major wars we have going on that the United States is involved in supporting the good guys. And meanwhile, they haven't confirmed an ambassador to Israel. So right. That's on the Senate. On the House side, it's just the fact that they're not even in session. They don't have a speaker at a time like this. I think it will accelerate the process today, tomorrow, Thursday, this week, so that, we'll get a speaker by the end of the week. We're not going to have a long, drawn-out process because it's not good to have, the House of Representatives AWOL in the middle of a global crisis.
Well, some people are saying that these attacks occur when, in this case, America looks weak. And I'm sure that's the case somehow. But how closely does Putin and Hamas or any other actor in Iran or anywhere else pay attention to the chaos in American politics? Is there anything that would suggest that the chaos in the House, not having a speaker, is have anything to do with the timing or severity?
No, it has nothing to do with Hamas's timing. I mean, they're focused on Israel, not on the United States. Putin is more often focused on the United States. And so, for instance, I think there is little to no chance of any negotiations in the next 13 months because Putin is waiting for the American presidential election. And he's praying. He said publicly that he favors Trump, and he's praying for that because he knows that if Trump is elected, he has it's the end of Ukraine. He will he thinks that he said it was a brilliant move in February of 2022. When Putin invaded Ukraine, he said called him a quote genius. So he will greenlight him to do whatever it takes. He will cut off funding for Ukraine. And as Putin said, if the ammo gets cut off, Ukraine won't last a week. He doesn't mean a week from now because they have enough ammo to last for another couple of months. But if they don't get it soon, they're finished. Yeah. So the presidential election in the United States is very connected to Ukraine. It's not really very connected to Israel and Hamas, because either a Democratic or a Republican president, whoever it is, would be a strong supporter of Israel and will back Israel taking care of business and trying to eliminate Hamas, which is what they're going to do.
Well, let's get back to your piece, the title of which we haven't really even gotten to yet, but you go deep into the potential circumstances here. Will Bibi survive the fallout? The news from Israel will get worse and then maybe better. I mean, explain why he, you talked about 9/11 and the Bush administration wasn't necessarily, or we didn't blame America necessarily for that, but the reaction to that was, of course, an invasion in Iraq, and the world lost all sympathy for America certainly after that. But then he got reelected in 2004 after 9/11, after the invasion, after he saw a presidential daily briefing that said bin Laden determined to attack America. So they're going to make similar arguments here that Bibi should have known, or maybe he did know. Some people are now saying that this attack was imminent.
I don't think he knew, but I think you make a good point, a counter argument that I should have accounted for. I did say that Bibi will get popular right now. There'll be a kind of rally around the flag effect that always happens when any nation is in trouble. So he's secured himself for now. But it was very damaging to the Labor Party, which had exclusive control of the Israeli government from the founding of Israel in 1948 until 1977. That's a long run. Why did it end? Because Labor was in power when the Arab armies attacked in 1973 in the Yom Kippur War, which is the biggest war until this week. And so it's true that it took a little bit of time, but eventually what it did was it soured the Israeli people on the Labor government because they were in some ways discredited by that war, even though, arguably Israel eventually won, as they're going to win this time too. So there is going to be a serious reckoning. This was not just like a minor intelligence lapse. It's actually much worse than the lapse that Israeli intelligence had on Yom Kippur 50 years ago this month. It actually was just one day after the 50th anniversary, and it's possible that Hamas wanted to do it on or close to the 50th anniversary of what is still considered to be an Arab victory in Arab countries in the Yom Kippur War. So in any event, it's too soon for that reckoning. First, they have to win, and they will win. But there will be a reckoning. And I think the conclusion will be, we don't know any details, that Bibi's government became dysfunctional. And because this was not like a small screw up, this was a big time screw up. And, maybe he can dodge responsibility. I think you make a good point that Bush was able to. But remember, Bush was brand new. He ignored that bin Laden plans attacks in the U.S., his first summer. But Bibi has been responsible to protect the country from Hamas, and he failed. And so this idea of him being like the only guy who could protect Israel, that's been his calling card for his entire time in office. It's kind of in tatters right now. He'll try to spin his way out of it. He'll try to do what you suggested, and it might work for him. I have to acknowledge that, you might be right. He's kind of a Houdini-type politician. He always figures out how to get out of a jam. So it might work for him, but I do think that an event of this magnitude will rearrange Israeli politics after the immediate danger passes. It's kind of hard to believe that, when this ends, they're just going to go back to status quo ante. Right. That when they're arguing about dumb things and legitimately worried about whether Bibi is going to destroy Israeli democracy by compromising the court system. And you have to remember that thousands of reservists who are now loyally, patriotically, mobilizing, 300,000 have mobilized in the last couple of days. They were out demonstrating in the streets against Bibi, right? And so he can try to say, oh, it's the liberals who are responsible for the fact that we fell asleep at the switch. That's like blaming his own military that will have just beaten Hamas at great loss. I don't think he's going to be able to slip away from at least some responsibility for what happened. But the other potentially good news, other than the fact that this will scramble Israeli politics and and at least there's a decent chance they'll usher out the Netanyahu era, is that I don't think that Iran will be successful in scuttling the Saudi-Israel peace deal. And in fact, this kind of situation will, after a decent interval, they can't, it's in the deep freeze for right now, or the mini freeze for right now, but after a passage of a certain amount of time, I don't know how much, I think both Israel and Saudi Arabia will redouble their efforts to do a deal to contain Iran. Well, because Iran is their enemy. And the Saudis, I think, MBS doesn't really give a damn about the Palestinians. It's been clear. His father, the king, cares more. But I think he will be open to a deal that probably involves the Egyptians and the Gulf states to send Arab peacekeepers who have peace treaties with Israel to occupy Gaza, because everybody, even Israelis, know that for the IDF to occupy Gaza over any period of time, it doesn't work. I mean, they've been there before and they got out. They withdrew in 2005. Just on that point, very quickly, Pete, I think, is the guess on my part, that these often idiotic left-wing blowhards who are talking about the situation as if they know what they're saying, I think many of them actually believe that Israel has been occupying Gaza for the last 20 years. They confuse it with the West Bank. They don't really get that there's a distinction between moderate Fatah, the Palestinian Authority, and the murderous, thuggish terrorists who make up Hamas. They just kind of conflate the distinction, sometimes intentionally, which is truly despicable, but often out of just pure ignorance.
But
they simply don't know what they're talking about. It's like, I'm on the side of the Palestinians, and they don't understand that there are moderate Palestinians who are, by the way, being abused by the Israelis in the West Bank, and then there are fanatic terrorist Palestinians in Gaza, which is not being occupied. And I just think they're basic. It's going to be now after this, but for the last 20 years has not been occupied by Israel.
But it's not been.
If you went out on the street, most people don't even know that.
I think that's probably true. Most people's knowledge, but occupation is different than control. Certainly, Israel is controlling Gaza to the point that the people there have been suffering for years in terms of getting out themselves, getting things in, and being at the whim of the Israeli defense and Israeli government.
Right, right. That's
a difference between
for good reason, Pete. I mean, we just saw why they don't want to just let Palestinians in Gaza just enter Israel willy-nilly, because if they do, they will kill women and children. That's what we just found. So, yes, has the Israeli government been controlling what goes in and out of Gaza? Yes. Have they been preventing them from getting food and medical supplies? No. They're like 1,000 trucks, I think 1,000 trucks a day that bring stuff into Gaza. But no, there's a legitimate security risk, which a lot of people, including me to a certain extent, thought was an elaborate rationalization. We thought that maybe Hamas could be brought into, civil society. They legitimately won an election in 2006 where they beat Fatah, which was more corrupt, the Palestinian Authority, which had been there and was more corrupt. And it seemed like they, through the democratic process, deserved a shot starting in 2006 to run that society. But it pretty quickly became clear that all the money that they got from Iran, or not all, but a large percentage of the money that they got from the Gulf states and other places, they were just putting into building tunnels and buying weapons and doing nothing to better the lives of 2.5 million people. So to be clear,
so I'm understanding you right. Do you think the people of Gaza are suffering? And if so, do you think it's as a result of Hamas's leadership or the Israelis government and what
well,
they're...
it's obviously some combination of the two, but, to listen to a certain kind of pro-Palestinian analysis in Europe and the United States, it would be 100% the fault of Israel, which we now know is ridiculous. That, just take Qatar gave them $1 billion. What did they do with it? Did they build a single hospital? I mean, maybe they built a couple hospitals with it, but the vast majority of that money went into buying weapons to try to destroy Israel. And so what are the consequences of that for the Palestinian people, the long-suffering Palestinian people of Gaza? They had a government that just nursed their grievances, played to their Jew hatred, and, did very little to better their lives. And it's really unfortunate. I mean, when I remember when I went to Gaza in 1998 with Bill Clinton, it was at a high point in Israeli-Palestinian relations, because the reason that Clinton went to the region was that the Palestinian Authority, Yasser Arafat, had decided for the first time to recognize Israel's right to exist. It was a wonderful moment for the world. But I remember sort of the hatred in the eyes of the Palestinians that I met in Gaza. And I remember feeling much more fearful there than on the West Bank, that just the people were angrier and just considerably more hostile to Americans. And what I also remember is that I noticed something that I later found out President Clinton had also remarked upon on his trip to Gaza. While it's kind of like there's a lot of rubble and barbed wire and desolate, empty lots, it's also right on the Mediterranean. And the beaches are beautiful. And, the setting is really beautiful. And if they had decided that they were going to be more like, say, the people of Ramallah, who have built, university, really improved a university on the West Bank. They have thriving businesses on the West Bank. If the people of Gaza had decided that they would do that, they could have gotten a lot of foreign investment and created a little, Miami Beach or some kind of Mediterranean tourist destination that would have brought people in from all over the world. I think they would have had a lot of Western tourists there. But instead, they went along with the, quote unquote leadership of what we now know is a terrorist organization. And some people have known it for a long time. I mean, in defense of the harder line Israelis, they've been saying this all along. You can't do business with Hamas. They're terrorists. And they turned out to be right. And we have to acknowledge that.
I don't know enough. But
liberal Israelis said the same thing, by the way.
I don't know enough about that time or that Qatar, investment. But when you say the people of Gaza, if they had decided to, I'm not sure that it was up to them. Wasn't it Iranian influenced? Hamas leadership didn't have elections. It's not like it's democracy over there. So when you say the people of Gaza, if they had decided to, I feel like you...
Right. That's true. But they could have, if they had different leadership, they could have, for instance, said, we won't be used as
sure if they had different leadership, but they
could say to Hamas, I know you want to put, your stockpile of weapons inside our mosque, but no can do. Right. I know you want to have like this cache of RPGs at our school, but I'm sorry. But what happened was after there was a democratic moment where the PA, the Palestinian Authority, was so corrupt that Hamas actually won a legitimate election in 2006 because the people there decided to take their chances with Hamas over the PA. And that turned out to be a very, very bad, decision. And I think you're right that after that point, They didn't really have much to say about it because they were under the thumb of these terrorists. Well, and if they had, if they had tried to resist Hamas, and there should be more written about this than there is, they would be summarily executed the way it works in other rogue states. I think it's not like it was up to them, but they could have made it clear that they didn't want to pursue this course, and there could have been more opposition to Hamas than there has been. By the way, there is a certain amount. That's why until now, Israeli intelligence has been good, because they've always been able to find Palestinians who, in exchange for some Benjamins, tell them where Hamas is hiding weapons. And, they didn't tell them as much where their tunnels were until they, used those tunnels to stage attacks on Israel a few years ago. But, they've had decent intelligence until now. And I think one of the big questions is, why those intelligence networks that had served Israel relatively well failed. The initial reports that I've read are that the Israeli military and intelligence agencies just got really arrogant. And, they're led by Bibi cronies. And when you think about it, anybody who would want to be in his government is like wanting to be in Trump's government. So the talented ones, people like Benny Gantz, who's the former defense minister, they quit.
You can't be very effective in the intel business if you're arrogant, but it does seem that happens everywhere across the world. I mean, if you're in that world, that's the last thing you should be. But let me ask you about the reaction here. I often think about 9/11 and our reaction to it. It led to the war in Iraq, obviously Afghanistan. It led to Abu Ghraib. It led to torture. It led to war crimes. It led to all kinds of horrible things as a result. And America lost the sympathy of the world. It would seem that after all of these conflicts, regardless of who started it or who, it always seems that a lot more people die on the Palestinian side and in pretty brutal ways. Doesn't Israel right now have the opportunity to lose the sympathy that much of the world is giving them if they go in and, as they already have, commit war crimes themselves, knock down entire buildings, kill innocent children and civilians?
Wait a minute. So, yes, and they will lose the sympathy. It's just a matter of days before that happens. But before I say that, I want to just talk about 9/11 for a second. So when people say these Hamas atrocities are the fault of Israel, it reminds me of there were a few people after 9/11, and I wrote a column in Newsweek about this at the time, who were saying, quote, "This is the chickens coming home to roost. What did we expect on 9/11 given U.S. policy in the Middle East?" And to me, that is it's blaming the victims. That wasn't the fault of the people on those airplanes. That wasn't the fault of the people in the World Trade Center. And, there is never any excuse for targeting innocent civilians. And we need to stay focused on innocent civilians. There's a distinction here, as bad as Israeli policy is in many ways. They don't intentionally target civilians. If you put your missiles in a mosque or in a school, civilians will inevitably die. But they're not being targeted. It's the weapons that are being targeted. Now, are people killed when that happens? Are there errant bombs like one landed yesterday in a marketplace, killed a bunch of people in Gaza City? Yes. Are those war crimes? No. Because unlike Vladimir Putin and unlike Hamas, they are not trying to indiscriminately kill civilians. They're going after terrorists and weapons depots, not innocent civilians. Intentionality is everything in the calculus of what is and is not a war crime.
I guess the point is about foreign policy and how consequences. I mean, bin Laden determined to attack America because, as he said for years, America's imperialism, our bases in the Middle East, especially in Saudi Arabia. You know, Tom Ricks comes on, military historian, no liberal, saying before 9/11, the solution to this conflict, I believe before 9/11, is to have energy independence. You know, I mean, like, as long as we're there.
Totally right. So, but that's, and by the way, we're close to having that now. But that's all totally true. I'm not saying that these larger strategic foreign policy interests,
so what I mean,
imperialism, call it U.S. imperialism, call it Israeli imperialism, call it anything you want. It does not justify killing women and children. So you can use it for contextual purposes. But what ends up happening is that explanation becomes justification and rationalization. And people cannot hold the distinction very easily in their minds between context and justification. And when they slide over into justification, that's when I have a really big problem. And that's happening now. Or what the other thing that, I think is happening is there are now calls for, de-escalation. You're hearing that a lot on TV. Peace. Let's just have peace. Israel needs to stop the shooting. No. That's like saying Barack Obama needs to stop trying to eliminate ISIS, needs to stop trying to degrade ISIS. Hamas is ISIS. People need to get used to that. And so, if you say, let's just stop trying to fight ISIS, I don't think that would have been popular. Or after 9/11, when we went into Afghanistan, this was not, the years-long commitment. This was when we wiped out the Taliban and tried in futility to catch Osama bin Laden. And he got away, and, it was
Tora Bora, it was called, a cave complex in the border of Pakistan and Afghanistan.
Yeah, he got away. So are people saying, they shouldn't have gone after him? Is that what people are saying now? They shouldn't have gone after Osama bin Laden. They shouldn't have gone after the Taliban in 2001. That war, which had like 99.9% support at the time. To say that the Israelis should stop now is to say that wasn't justified. Were there innocent Afghans who were collateral damage in that war? Of course. Will there be innocent Palestinians who are collateral damage? There already are in this war. But if you commit terrorism, you need to suffer the consequences. And to say that you don't is to basically, set the stage for further acts of impunity. Terrorism without consequences.
Is there never a situation where violence does not beget more violence? Meaning, I fully take your point here in so many different ways, but at some point strategically, no matter the horror of the act, there are many different ways to try to prevent it. But if you knock down entire buildings or kill a bunch of children, whether it's by accident or not, or, reoccupy, it only maybe perpetuates the violence. Isn't that always been the story there and throughout the...
No, not always. I mean, obviously, like the Iraq War, as a response to 9/11 was, tragically wrong. And you do right now in particular, we need to use as much diplomacy as we can to keep the fighting from spreading. Like there's a chance that Hezbollah will take advantage of this on Israel's northern border. There are problems on the West Bank. And, there's a lot of support in the Arab world for what Hamas did, and the Arab Street, is on fire now. So no, you don't always have to. But the status quo ante, what we had before, Hamas running Gaza, cannot and will not be restored. So people just have to get used to it and should not. This is the thing that I think people need to understand. They have lost their right to be to run things in Gaza. They've just lost it by this. And so in the same way that, if, let's just say, I think this discussion of like terrorists coming over the border from Mexico is completely preposterous. But let's just say that the president of Mexico was a terrorist, like the leadership of Hamas in Gaza City. Let's just say he was a terrorist and that he sent squads of terrorists to kill people in 22 communities in California and Texas. Slaughter them. Slaughter. The equivalent in our case, as a proportion of our population, slaughter 22,000 people. That's what it would be proportionate to what happened in Israel. So just to keep the analogy going, the president of Mexico sent Mexican terrorists over the border and they slaughtered 22,000 people. Do you think that we would not legitimately send the U.S. Army into Mexico and take care of business? Of course we would. Any nation would. So this reaction, yes, it would be obviously much better for them to be careful in their targeting so that they kill as few civilians accidentally as possible. They are not targeting civilians. They are targeting the Hamas infrastructure. And so when civilians, they should just they should just refuse to be human shields, which many of them are. Now, plenty of innocent
I don't know if that's
Palestinians,
fair.
Plenty of innocent Palestinians are dying, and my heart really goes out to them and their family. And I don't think we want their families. I don't think we want to lose compassion for them. War is brutal.
I don't think you get to decide to be a human shield or not.
Oh, yes, you do.
Really?
You definitely have. Yeah. If there are weapons in your school, it's very unfortunate for your children, but you don't send your children to that school because
where do you send them? I'm not sure where you send them in a conflict
in the short term. You keep them at home like we did during COVID, but you don't do that. That is, look, I'm not saying that the Palestinians in Gaza have free reign to make any decision they want. They obviously don't. They can't travel outside Gaza, for instance. They obviously don't. They're living under the heel of both Hamas and Israel, even though Israel is not occupying until, a week from now. They're not occupying Gaza. They will, again, because they have to. But with any luck, their occupation will be very short and we'll get a pan-Arab peacekeeping force that will restore order in Gaza.
What do you make of the man who you profiled better than any other author, historian, Jimmy Carter, in your book, His Very Best, Jimmy Carter, A Life? He has called Israel apartheid state how many years ago? I think most of
the world
agrees with that now.
Well, a lot of Israelis agree with it. I agree with it myself. And a former prime minister of Israel called what they're doing in the West Bank apartheid, and I think that's accurate. But I think there's also a misunderstanding of what Carter was trying to do when he went and met with Hamas in 2006, I believe it was. And I had some lengthy conversations with him about this. And, there was a lot of criticism from the right about Carter meeting with Hamas. And while it's easy in retrospect now to say, well, he shouldn't have done that, Hamas was never going to change, at the time, there were some indications that the leadership of Hamas 2 decades ago was possibly amenable to changing their charter, which calls for the destruction of Israel, and moving in the direction of the Palestinian Authority in terms of being more moderate. And so what happened, I don't want to get too far into the weeds, is that, there was this schism, which exists to this day, although the PA yesterday was, for reasons that are pretty predictable, they were in support of Hamas, but they have detested Hamas, and Hamas has detested them for 2 decades. So there was this schism in the Palestinian movement that I think few Americans mouthing off know anything about. And what Jimmy Carter was trying to do, and I think he was right to do this, was to make peace among the Palestinians. This is what we discussed. So that if the PA, the Palestinian Authority, and Hamas could do a deal with each other where they narrowed their divisions and also, went with the PA's recognition of Israel, which would require Hamas to change its charter, that then you would enhance the prospects of a Middle East peace, a two-state solution. But, he would say this, that Israel could not negotiate with 2 different groups of Palestinians, the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. A negotiation has to be between 2 parties to have any real chance of success. And so he was just trying to get all the Palestinians on the same side. He was doing shuttle diplomacy between Ramallah and Gaza City, trying to bring the 2 different Palestinian groups together. He failed, but I think it was a good effort on his part, and I don't think he should have been subjected to the vituperation and the criticism that he suffered. People say, how can he meet with Hamas? Well, it's easy to meet with your friends. It's meeting with your enemies that's tough. But having said that, Hamas today said, we're ready to talk with Israel. And Israel rightly said, screw you. Now you want to talk? Like after you've, killed our people and massacred our women and children and grabbed, over 100 hostages, you want to talk? You want to have a hostage swap? Sorry, you're threatening to kill your hostages. It's not going to get it done with us. We're at war, pal. And so I think that Hamas and Iran got more than they bargained for. And I don't know if they thought Israel had gone soft. I don't know what they thought. But they severely miscalculated. And they thought that terrorism was going to be an answer. Terrorism is never an answer. Terrorism never works. Terrorism isn't only brutal and cruel, it's stupid. Because it doesn't better anybody's life and it doesn't work politically. And so, this is something that Hamas is going to have to learn the hard way, and very little of its leadership will survive.
Jonathan Alter, I could talk to you all day. I appreciate all your time today, especially because you were standing the entire time. Very brave. So much more in your post that we didn't get to and everything that you're writing over at Old Goats. But, man, very thorough. Much appreciated. Grateful for your time, expertise, credibility on these issues, and obviously your passion and opinions and thoughts on it. Thank you, sir.
Great talking to you, Pete.
All right, there you go, Jonathan Alter. I hope you like that. I'd love to know what you hear about it. standupwithpete@gmail.com. I'd love to hear what you think about it, not what you hear about it. I didn't mean to say that. You know what I meant to say. Anyway, what I mean to say is goodbye, and thank you very much for listening to today's show. I'll hopefully get something up tomorrow, but I'm on the road for 5 hours and then hanging out with my best girl up at Ithaca College, where she's a freshman. This will be the first time I'm seeing her, so I'm very excited about that. No hangout tonight, as I said yesterday, because of that, but I'll try to catch up with you over the weekend. Love you guys. Thanks so much for listening all the way to the end. It means a lot to me, my bumblebee. John Carroll, take us away.
Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up. Stand up. I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You gotta stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You gotta stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Oh, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up. Oh, got to stand